Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Top 10 edition of Magic Mike's, proudly sponsored by our Patreon supporters and CoolStuffInc.com, where you can find cool stuff in stock every day, and our co-sponsor CardHoarder.com, offering the best inventory, prices, and delivery of cards on Magic Online, and our newest co-sponsor Cardamajigs.com, presenting Cubamajigs. These durable, scratch-resistant plastic cases are perfect for cubes, sideboards, and more, with new designs every single Monday. I am Evan Irwin, and we get started each week by saying hello to my two co-hosts, Aaron Campbell.
How's it going?
Ruben Bressler.
Oh, hi.
Hey.
Good to be back.
It is good to be back, as always. That said, we also begin with our choice of the top comment from last week in a segment we call Honorable Mention, where Ruben will tell us who was the most luxuriant and letting us know what card we did not choose as one of our top 10 split cards. Ruben?
This week's winner is Donald Taylor, who writes, while it wouldn't feel out of place in a cube, I was sad to see a certain split card not inspire something in Battle Bond or a conspiracy yet, since it can be used many different ways in multiplayer formats. While Predator's Grasp makes for a great card, Knotty and Nice also allowed you to give something to another player if the situation required. Worst case, it could also be revived by Aaron as a part of a two-person drag review. Would you be Knotty or would you be Nice, Aaron?
Wow.
Oh gosh, I would probably have to be Nice. You know, I keep thinking of Sugar and Spice from Batman Forever, I think it is, where you had, you know, and so I would probably be, I'd probably be Nice.
I don't think either of us are voting in the nice category. I'm just going to throw that out there.
What do you mean? I'm wearing baby blue.
For those,
only nice girls wear baby blue.
For those who don't know, in 2012, this was the Happy Holidays promo. Knotty was 2 black and a generic mana for a sorcery that said, search another target player's library for a card and put that card into your hand, then shuffle that player's library. While Nice was 2 white and a generic mana, excuse me, for a sorcery that says, search your library for a card and put it into another target player's hand, then shuffle your library. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Search their library or yours and give it to somebody else. So that's neat. Thank you very much, Donald, for interacting with us here on the show.
Thank you.
Get in touch with us on social media. Feel free to try to get a hold of Erin. She may have blocked you. You know how it is. It's just a week in, week out, y'all. Message the moderators on the subreddit. You know, send smoke signals to @MagicMicesCast on Twitter. It's fine. The point is, CoolStuffInc.com, $50 gift certificate coming to you. Thank you very much. We're going to move on with the show. Let's go ahead and talk about this category came, first of all, from our Discord. So thanks very much to our Discord patrons. You can just support us at $1 to get in on Discord, and you can hear from us all week long.
And it's always popping.
It's always popping. At this point, it's become this sort of self-fulfilling Discord where I get most of my news from the week from the Discord, and then the Discord gets most of their news from the week from the show, and it's this perpetual news motion machine, and it's a beautiful thing, and I love it in there.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it definitely feels like our own little petri dish that we've sort of cultivated, and like we've watched it grow, and we've seen people interact, and I'm just very proud of it, and I'm in there all the time. So
yeah, and one of the channels we have on our Discord is feedback and improvement, and someone had mentioned, hey, what about the top 10 cards that changed MTG forever? And I was like, oh, that's such a cool idea. I thought that was a great list. Honestly, this is, and I was thinking just while I was building this, I was like, we can just do 10 more cards that changed Magic forever. There's a long list.
Yeah, especially because the game means different things to all three of us. You know, things that would have changed my Magic life might not necessarily be blips on the radar when it comes to you two. And so I think this is an opportunity. And based on the number of hires and sames that I've heard we have, it's going to be a good night.
Yeah. Absolutely. Per usual, I'll be sitting most of this one out. That's kind of my role here.
Wow.
It's to introduce, get it started, and then say nothing for like half the show.
That has been a common trend as of late.
Yeah.
Here recently, it's fine. That said, let's go ahead and get started here with our number 10. Ruben, what's your number 10?
Well, I don't have many hires, but my number 10 is higher on someone else's list.
Okay, Aaron, do you have a number 10?
I do. I'm so fine with this. So, Dominaria was very much an anomaly in terms of what it did for Magic the Gathering. You know, they managed to pack so much into one set, and they would have had to have tried, I think, harder to make it bad. Just everything that was coming out of it was just amazing. And I think this was one of the first things they actually showed off from Dominaria. And I admit that I wasn't crazy about this when it first came out. I was like, about all this, but as we started spending more time with the set, I really grew to like this style of card. And I really grew to like all of these cards. And I was pleased to see in a recent article, I think Rosewater had mentioned that they were well received. And so there is a possibility of this type of card coming back in future sets, which I think is great. My number 10 is Phyrexian Scriptures, but also just sagas in general.
Nice.
So sagas are a subtype of enchantment that were introduced in Dominaria. Started off being designed by Morrow, and then Morrow pitched it to Richard Garfield. And Richard Garfield got the idea to kind of make something that was like a board game. He really wanted to, they decided that they really wanted to focus on the stories of Dominaria because there were so many iconic stories that happened there. And they had never really had like a story cycle before. You know, we had a bunch of songs. There was the Vile Requiem, you know, war dance kind of cycle. And there had certainly been stories referenced in flavor text, but this is the first time they'd ever really done like a story cycle. And, you know, Richard Garfield, being a game designer who designs all sorts of games, really wanted to turn it into a board game. And so his was the vision that ended up making it to the final draft. And they also borrowed on elements from Future Sight and from the original batch of Planeswalkers. And so it was really great to see all of these old ideas that were sort of put aside be, you know, oh, now's a good time to do these things. We're going to go ahead and mash them together. And I'm a big fan of sagas. I think they packed in so much flavor. They're beautiful on Arena. If you look at History of Benalia, the scroll, like gorgeous. And so I'm really anxious to see what they do with sagas next, because I think there are quite a few planes that you could really introduce them in, and it would be quite seamless.
I think the idea of like telling the story of the set, or with the main arc of the story or whatever, it would be way better told in sagas than it would be even as like we're seeing now. Currently, if you listen to this in the future, this is when War of the Spark is being spoiled, and they're trying to do things in sort of certain acts, like Act 1, here's some cards, Act 2, here's some cards, but they're not really providing a lot of context. They're just saying like, here's some planeswalkers that show up in Part 3 of Act 1, and you're like, well, why? Can you give me like a sentence to say why? Something like a saga is like, oh, X leads to Y, it's to Z. Okay, that's cool. Yeah. And that's kind of where they went.
Especially with such a historic plane like Dominaria, where so much of Magic's history has come from. Those kind of planes that have those overarching stories where we learn the history of Benalia, or the time of ice, or the Phyrexian Scriptures, telling specific stories from times past is just a great idea. And it doesn't translate very well to a lot of the other planes until you go there enough times. So you could probably do it for Ravnica at this point, and you could retell the signing of the Guilds Pact, and you could retell the Decamillennial Celebration and the Implicit Maze. But you need to go back a number of times to, you know, I think that we could probably do it for Innistrad eventually, probably for Zendikar eventually, although they don't write much down in Zendikar. But it does seem like a really cool idea that I definitely hope they bring back.
Absolutely. Now, for my number 10, this was a card that I brought up as part of the reason why I enjoyed the idea of this list. There were certain cards that when they came out, it's just everything was different. And the way that you looked at certain colors, the way you looked at certain creatures, the way you looked at certain card types, all that stuff's going to be covered. But for me, there was a time, particularly when Time Spiral Block was out, and even before then, you know, there was, even with Ravnica was great, but in terms of like white cards, white sucked. White did very little of anything back then. White was a secondary color. It was Orzhov. It was not mono white anything. There was a white black, I think they called it hand-to-hand deck back in Kamigawa, which was neat. But again, white was always a secondary color. It just basically went along with the real powerful cards and wasn't its own sort of impressive piece of the color pie. And then came Lorwyn. And Lorwyn showed us what a circle of sugar and a word of forbiddance looks like. And that's Oblivion Ring. Oof. Oblivion Ring is a white and 2 generic mana for a common enchantment from Lorwyn. When Oblivion Ring enters the battlefield, you exile another target non-land permanent. And when Oblivion Ring leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. And the simplicity of this, the universal sort of answer of this, that takes care of any card type, well, as long as it's non-land, doesn't matter, and gives white a true sort of an identity of this is the color that gets, it's got the answers, it's got them down, it's going to be answer anything, you know, lock down anything, that's a good thing. And Oblivion Ring was really the card that started that, really feeling like it was hitting home, like white had a thing to do now.
Absolutely. Fabulous choice. Oblivion Ring. There has been an Oblivion Ring style effect in Standard ever since then, really.
Basically.
Whether it's Oblivion Ring or Nowadays, Conclave Tribunal,
Thopter Arrest, I think it was.
Yeah, there's Thopter Arrest.
Pyromancer's Cage.
Yeah. Pyromancer's Cage. There's Ixalan's Binding that has a little bit of a play on that. Not to mention things like Seal Away and various sundry things like that. Also, Fiend Hunter and that effect is, and Palace Jailer. That's just part of White's identity, is being able to take stuff off of the battlefield. Journey to Nowhere is another example. It's inspired this long lineage of cards that have this style of effect of removing it entirely, but you can bring it back. It's sort of the banishment effect. That if the spell is broken, then it can be returned. And really, you're right, gave White an identity like it never had before.
Also gives it a neat way around the rules too. You know, I think of Journey to Nowhere and I think of Emrakul, where it's like Emrakul can't be targeted by, you know, colored spells, but it's something about the way the enchantment hits and then it targets. And so that's an ability. It's not necessarily the spell, if I understand it correctly. Yes. And so just, you know, changing the way that we think of interactions as well.
Yeah, the if you go and you see sort of the evolution of Oblivion Ring was in Lorwyn. Oblivion Ring was in Shards of Alara, and then in Zendikar was Journey to Nowhere, which was kind of sort of the evolution, right? It's only 2 mana, but it only hits a creature. And they have not gotten anywhere close to anything as efficient as Journey to Nowhere. Seal Away was as good as you're getting. That's why Journey to Nowhere is like a $2 card, because just they have only made it 3 times, and they're not going to make it there very much again. 2 mana answer any creature. That rate's a little strong.
High.
All I'm saying. That said, move on here to number 9. This is the part where I leave the show, at least in terms of introducing my picks.
No.
Until number 6.
Wow.
Yeah. So we'll see you guys later. That said, Ruben, what's your number 9?
My number 9 is a creature that has shifted and changed the way that we look at all of the formats it's ever been involved in. It's sat on the bench as a banned card in some of those formats as well. But it's through its entire life in Standard, its entire life in Legacy, it has been a major fixture on the tournament scene. And it's partially because of how it sort of skirts exactly what cards are supposed to do and what creatures are supposed to be capable of. Cards aren't supposed to be able to cheat mana costs. It's something that is very dangerous and very awkward. Cards aren't necessarily always supposed to be able to tutor for exact pieces and be able to search your library at a very low, efficient rate. This card also does that. Being able to play things without having there be a chance of countering them or interacting with them on the stack is another thing that this card does very well. And beyond all of those history-making things on the battlefield, away from the battlefield, there was because of the way the banned list works, this is the only card that has ever been legal in Standard and illegal in Standard at the same time. Until Nexus of Fate showed up, and you could only play it in best of 3 as opposed to best of 1. But for a very brief moment in time, in 2011, you could play the War of Attrition event deck, legal for Standard constructed play, with your 2 copies of Stoneforged Mystic. Oof. And not play it anywhere else. And so for that reason and many others, Stoneforged Mystic is my entry here.
This card is bananas. This card is like natural order. This card is its own combo piece. It both finds the combo piece, puts it into play, all on counterability. I don't know if they have it anymore, but I certainly heard during that time period that they actually like taped like Stoneforged Mystic up on the wall in R&D. It'd be like, you see what we did there? That was stupid. That was bad. Do not make the card in and of itself its own combo. Like, it finds the thing and plays the thing.
I think it's fine in Modern. Unban it.
That's what everybody says. I mean, and everybody was like, oh my God, Jace is going to break everything. And now, like, Jace is neat, but like,
I mean, you've got people flipping titties. You've got, 12 power of zombies on the board. Like, it's fine.
It's fine. Whatever. I think it would be fine, but there's that, it's just almost got like this tinfoil hat part of it now. It's just like, okay, here comes the ban and reserve or restricted update. Here comes them Stoneforged Mystics going up in price.
It's definitely a card that you have to answer right away. When I'm playing Dredge and I'm up against that, I know that I need to save a therapy. I need to have maybe 2 therapies. I cannot let that Batterskull hit the board because it is going to be a slog if I do, or if they're playing Jit, that's a thing you don't want to deal with, or a sword. The ability to get exactly what what you need, you know, to take care of a situation is so good. And, you know, you can strap it to itself even, you know, like it's good by itself. It's good with other things. It's just so good.
Did we actually say what Stoneforged Mystic did? I don't think we actually read the card. If you want to read what,
I can certainly do that if you'd like.
I didn't see what the scriptures did. I just realized.
That's also true. We also didn't go over what Phyrexian scriptures said.
That's fair, but go ahead.
Okay, Stoneforged Mystic is a colorless and a white. One of the top 3 core artificers ever printed, for my money. It's a 1/2. When Stoneforged Mystic enters the battlefield, you can search your library for an equipment card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. And if that wasn't enough, for a colorless, a white, and tapping the Stoneforged Mystic, you can put an equipment card from your hand onto the battlefield, being a staple part of course, the Cawblade decks that we're able to search out, sort of Feast and Famine and Batterskull, being a big part of the legacy Stoneblade decks that also added Umezawa's Jite to the mix. Basically, if you're running an equipment in a format that has Stoneforged Mystic legal, you want to be running them together.
This card's so bananas. It's so, like, at the time, like I was seeing R&D all the time back then. I was at Pro Tours, I was on Magic Cruises, man, I was everywhere. And I would just sit there and I'd be like, what are you doing? I just don't get it. I don't understand. It's weird.
Another one of those cards. Why does it have 2 toughness? Like,
right.
You could gut shot it. You could dark blast it. Why?
Man.
All of that and 2 toughness. Like, oh.
I love me some Mike Turian, but he has no chill when it comes to developing Magic sets.
No.
The pedal goes to the floor.
At the time, this thing being able to stand in front of a goblin lackey was a huge deal. So.
Crazy. That said, Aaron, what's number 9?
So there are people who are happiest playing Magic when you don't get to play Magic. They like things like Trinisphere. They love Thorn of Amethyst, Sphere of Resistance, things like that. I'm more of the person where I'm fine if you cast all those cards because they're probably not going to do anything against me anyway. So I'm fine. I'm fine letting you play spells. That's fine. I'm not really a counterspell girl. I'm not really a prison girl. It's not really my style. Anyways, if you do happen to be more of the prison type, this card is right up your alley. And this is a card that we've even talked about as possibly being evergreen. You know, there was a time back in Battle for Zendikar Standard, Kaladesh Standard, where answers were few and far between. There were a lot of cards running around, and we weren't asking for a lot. We weren't asking for Rest in Peace. We weren't asking for, you know, Chalice of the Void. We would have been fine with just some basic answers. And this is a card that we really could have used, that maybe Standard would have been a little differently. And I do believe this is a card that should be at least in every block, because I think it can make a huge difference. My number 9 is Pithing Needle. So Pithing Needle is 1 colorless. It's an artifact. As Pithing Needle comes into play, name a card. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name cannot be played unless they're mana abilities. So before this card came along, we had Meddling Mage. You know, we obviously had like Null Chamber, you know, but this was really just the first of like that precision, you know, 1 colorless. Any deck can play it. You can just drop it on turn 1. You know exactly what you're naming, and it's just a clean answer. You could really print this in every block. We do Duress, we do Naturalize. Like, what's wrong with Pithing Needle? We had never really seen an effect like this before, and we've seen effects since, but they've always been so broad. Chalice, you know, Chalice cuts off everything of a certain, you know, converted mana cost. You know, you mentioned the Oblivion Ring and exiling something. Oh no, it's there. You just can't do anything with it. And there's just, you know, this was really the first of its kind to really do that. And that, to me, it just changed the game.
This was the only card worth of crap in Savers of Kamigawa.
Yeah.
Now, these days, a lot of like sort of silly EDH stuff is worth more in Saviors than Pithing Needle, but I assure you, when that set came out, it was Pithing Needle and Kataki and a bunch of cards that weren't those 2 cards.
Yep.
And I was there. Driving home from the pre-release, we opened a whole box and we got that 1 Pithing Needle, and man, we were pumped about that 1 Pithing Needle because that was great. And this is definitely one of those cards that like there's a before Pithing Needle effects and after Pithing Needle effects, and the idea that you could get people with their fetch lands, the idea that Planeswalkers, like before Planeswalkers came out, they basically already had an answer built in, which was great. And we have things that's even better these days, like Sorcerer's Spyglass, which is just amazing and my best Pithing Needle ever. So I'm happy with either Pithing Needle or something like it, like Spyglass, all the time. I love that as a safety valve on the format always.
I was playing the Dovin's Acuity Masterminds acquisition deck recently, and I had the game completely locked up. My opponent couldn't do anything, and I was going to win the game, but I had an extra Masterminds acquisition to go wish for my Sorcerer's Spyglass, and I was trying to find the best card name name. with the Spyglass for the Field Bads.
Mhm.
And I settled on Highland Game because it was game at that point.
Wow.
But if you have any other good suggestions, good recommendations for that one, then let me know. But I love that effect, the Phyrexian Revoker, Pithing Needle effect, Sorcerer Spyglass, all those.
And as Ruben can tell you, there is a culture in the Magic community of playing a Pithing Needle type effect and being like, I'll name Lose Hope.
Right.
You know, go.
Yeah. Extinguish All Hope is the one for Modern that you want to use.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. All right. So that said, let's move on here to number 8. Once again, I don't have one, but it's a good one. So when it shows up, it'll be worth it. Ruben, what's your number 8?
My number 8 is a very Ruben card to have on this list.
Oh boy.
It is. We all have talked about Evan's love of Savannah Lions a number of times, but what if you put Savannah Lions in the color that wants Savannah Lions, right? Like, what if you put it in the correct color, the color that really wants to run it in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then you'd have Jackal Pup.
Nice.
I think Jackal Pup changed Magic forever. You just haven't seen the rate that you get with Jackal Pup, and you didn't for a long time. You didn't see it for 10 years. Think about how crazy people went when Tattermunge Maniac got spoiled. People went absolutely bananas.
Google this.
Oh, no. Oh, go look up Mike Flores' article, which I kid you not is named Yes, Really. That's the title of the article for Tattermunge Maniac, the unplayable garbage. That is a 1-mana 2/1 that has to attack every turn. That card is
It's
trash.
a goblin wearing a suit of what it killed. What on earth?
It's ridiculous. But at the time, we couldn't believe it.
And Jackal Pup, to this day, still kind of sets the bar. I mean, we had Satyr Fire Dancer. Mm-hmm. We've had the 4/9 Angel that takes whenever it takes damage, you also take damage. I mean, competitive players of the early mid 90s remember Jackal Pup. It was the card that helped set the pace as far as creatures went. Creatures weren't good. Spells were good. Creatures weren't good. And Red kind of went on a decline for a while as it came to high-powered, low-casting cost creatures.
Oh, yeah.
Unless they had even worse drawbacks. It's not the end-all, be-all, but it is certainly a starting point. It is the reason why we have cards that have 2 power as a 1-drop.
And I think you were thinking of Fire Drinker Satyr on
Fire
that
Drinker
one.
Satyr. That's what I meant. Yeah.
Because that card is literally Jackal Pup with a pump ability that pumps it and hits you, which again kind of pulls into that flavor of that Jackal Pup, as it were. But this was just that creature in and of itself basically drove the red deck and showed that, like, wow, that this card has a drawback, but actually it doesn't, because I'm just turning it sideways and I don't care if you deal damage to it because you're going to be at 0 before I'm at 0, and that's all that matters. And it's a bar that, I mean, I guess Goblin Guide pushed it further, but that's about as far as it's ever been pushed. Yeah. And Fire Drinker Satyr was incredibly exciting because it was Jackal Pup with upside, which was fantastic. That said, Aaron, what's your number 8?
My number 8 is one of my only higher on this list.
Nice. All right. Fair enough. Well, let's move on here to number 7. Again, I don't have one, but it's a good one. So it's going to be sweet when we get there. Ruben, what's number 7?
My number 7 is another archetype dependent card. And, you know, the archetype is Storm. We talk about the Storm scale. We talk about the Storm in Walmart. We talk about how nothing like Storm will ever really be printed again. Storm is a powerhouse in every format that it's ever been legal. It's won world championships. It's won Pro Tours. It's won modern and legacy and vintage tournaments. It is everything to everyone, and it's the boogeyman of a lot of those formats. And there is no Storm card that strikes fear into the heart of competitive players everywhere more than Tendrils of Agony. Tendrils of Agony is 2 colorless black sorcery originally from Scourge. Target player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life, and it has Storm, which means that for every spell cast before it that turn, you have another copy. And so basically you would play 9 other spells ahead of Tendrils. Then you'd play Tendrils as your 10th spell and be able to have an opponent lose 2 life 10 times for you to be able to kill them from 20.
This card is so stupid. The whole mechanic is just like, what were you thinking? It's one thing to just get a free thing that you untap the lands, which was also busted and dumb. But like, not only, because think of this, not only did they do it once, they did it again. They brought it back in Time Spiral.
I love this card. You know, I like to say that the reason why I don't play Modern Storm is because I'm lazy. Because in Modern, you have to go all the way up there. You got to go to like 18, 19. No one's got time for that. Like if you're playing Legacy Storm, get to 10. I can do that. And like when you go off a turn 1 with this, it just feels amazing. And it also can sometimes be used defensively. You know, I have seen people cast the Tendrils. Just to gain some life as a buffer, and I'll be like, and then they put it in the graveyard, and they're like, I'm gonna come back for you. They get past the flames to do it again, and so, you know, I love that. The card feels so good. I just.
What I appreciate about the Storm decks in general is that they are very complicated math and probability problems.
Yeah.
And they will teach you all about math and probability of like, okay, can I turn this over and not die, you know, to what's the 5-mana spell?
Ad nauseum.
Ad nauseum. Thank you. That's like, well, I mean, what's my chance? I don't know, but you need to know. And the best do.
I love that feeling. You know, I play around with Legacy Ad nauseum. I don't feel, I'm very self-conscious. I don't play it in public because I'm still worried about whiffing in front of people. And sometimes I don't go off the way that I should. So I like to play it alone in the dark on Magic Online where if I whiff, nobody can see. But I love it. You know, I like to compare Legacy Storm to jumping on stones across a creek and like just trying to hoping to God there's another stone there where you're like, okay, here's that, where's my next stone, and then hoping, and then you just might fall in the creek, but damn it, when you manage to make the trip, it just feels so right.
Well, I know I do all my whiffing in private.
Well, you should keep it there because this is a kid's show. But there are plenty of cards that Tendrils is emblematic of. Of course, the other Storm cards, including Grape Shot and Empty the Warrens, which are banned in Pauper. There are other Storm cards like Ground Rift that have had their time in the sun. Not to mention Storm enablers, things like Frantic Search, Time Spiral, even Ponder and Preordain can be referenced here. And of course, High Tide, which enables Brain Freeze, another Storm card that came from Scourge.
One of my favorites is Mind's Desire. Like,
yeah.
Can you still believe to this day they put this freaking mechanic in Walmart? They put this mechanic.
I think it's good. You know, Storm for the children. Just, you know,
it's like
the math.
Wu-Tang is also for the children.
It is.
But we don't put it right there next to the other goods that kids buy.
Me and Cyrus Corman Gill, we will come to your Boys and Girls Club and we will teach your kids Storm and Dredge. It's fine.
I can't
Look,
believe
you got to teach them young so that they're used to it by the time they get matched up against it in the 1-1 bracket.
Oh
exactly.
My God. Aaron, what's your number 7?
My number 7 changed the game in terms of discard spells. So when Magic first came out, we had some randomness. You know, we had Hymn to Turok. We had big spells like Mind Twist, you know, really grandiose effects. But it wasn't until later sets that we started to really narrow the focus a little bit in terms of being able to take specific cards. But a lot of the time there was a restriction there. You know, you had a card like Blackmail where it was like, you know, you had to do this little dance of like, you get 3 cards, target player reveals 3 cards. So they choose, and then you get to pick one of them, you know, and then you had things, you know, you had a card like Addle, which was like choose a color, and it was like look at players, and there were lots of conditions involved, lots of clauses involved. You had Therapy, which was cute, but then you had to play the sub game of can you blind name the card, and if you can't, it feels bad. You know, you had Unmask, which was cute if you had another black card in your hand, and if you didn't, well, you're paying 4, which feels terrible. But this was the card that really, really changed the game. We saw the impact that it had on Theros Standard. It helped sell packs by itself. My number 7 is Thoughtseize. So Thoughtseize is 1 black. It's a sorcery. Target player reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards it. You lose 2 life. End of story. You can target yourself if you're playing a reanimator strategy, but anything you want. You're not bound by color. You're not bound by card type. You're not bound by casting cost. Anything you want. I mean, this is the reason why Mono Black Devotion was so big. Turn 1 Thoughtseize, turn 2 Pack Rat. There goes your verdict. There goes your anger of the gods. Like, this is one of the reasons why Pack Rat was so powerful. And, you know, we've seen it since then. You know, we get Duress, and that's cute and all, but it's like, I would be very surprised if they let us have Thoughtseize in Standard again, because it made a huge impact in the format.
We won't.
We won't. This is like Mana Leak, where we have Quench now, which is fine. But Thoughtseize is too good. And don't make me tell that story again, Ruben. I will tell it. The financial
if you want to, go ahead.
They drop. Okay. the Thoughtseize is the best card in Lore one, okay? I'm not going to tell the story again. Lord knows if you listen to us talk about Thoughtseize, I've told it already like 3 times. But it's still the best card in Lore one. It was not close. It was the best card in Theros, also not close. Like, this is the best discard spell there is. Therefore, if you're the one casting it, you're automatically at so much of an advantage. You already know what their hand is. You've already taken their best card and then able to sort of play from there. This is not honestly an effect I'm not sure you want in any standard moving forward in terms of like what it does to the format.
And you need to cost it so much higher.
Right.
Think about Thought Erasure, which we have in standard right now, which is 2 mana and 2 different color mana to be able to look at your opponent's hand and choose just a card that isn't a land from it. Sure, you get to Surveil. Sure, you don't have to lose 2 life, but I would gladly take both of those things, obviously.
Oh, yeah. For turn 1 versus
backed
2.
up by premier 2-drops like Packrat and Bitter Blossom in those formats in which they were ubiquitous is insanely powerful as well.
Or you're playing Death Shadow where it's not even about the target. You're like, 2 life! Take that. Take your mana. I don't care. I'm like,
whatever. Eeny, meeny, miny, a non-land.
Just hurt me. It's fine.
Doesn't matter. It's just the Thoughtseize into Bitter Blossom.
It's a problem. And
there were nightmares that started that way. Multiple nightmares that started exact sequence of Thoughtseize into Bitter Blossoms. Disgusting. That said, let's move on here to number 6. I have one. Yay.
Work. Okay.
I'm excited. This is a card that, as I recall, Mark Rosewater was very, very hesitant to make. This was a card that it more or less shocked everyone when they saw this thing. It was, I can't believe you've done this. It was, they've printed this card a dozen times and it's still worth like $8 or $9. This was, now look, Oblivion Ring was one thing, but you don't just give 1 white mana, answer any creature.
Oh. Yeah.
All they get's a land. Like that's bananas. You would do something like that. And they were like, here comes Conflux, and here comes Path to Exile. Path to Exile is 1 white mana for an uncommon instant that says remove target creature from the game, aka exile target creature. Didn't have that stuff back in the day. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put that card into the battlefield tapped, then shuffle their library. And I swear to everyone was just like, this is real? Are you kidding me? This is actual factual like cardboard that we get to play with? I get to answer any creature ever for just 1 mana? And that was the thing that Rosewater was very concerned about. It's like, this design space in terms of X mana to get rid of X thing. I mean, you've seen Fatal Push, but Fatal Push is no Path to Exile. It just isn't.
I mean, Eldrazi, gods. I mean, just you look at it and, you look at it, a Path being ubiquitous in a format where people specifically don't play a lot of basics. So, there's been a lot of ink spilled about the drawback and whether or not it's worth it. And should we necessarily be, and specifically with the Abzan decks, Lily and Reed had written several articles about, do we really want to be running 4 paths? Are we giving them an advantage? Do we want to be doing that? And it's just, in a format where you have to be prepared for anything, whether it be a Wormcoil Engine or whether it be, a Celestial Colonnade or whatever it might be, you need to have an answer that's versatile like that. And it's so cheap, it's so efficient. And oftentimes there's no drawback because how many basic lands are people running nowadays?
Right. Yeah, it's a insanely ubiquitous and also changed Magic forever in that I think it's the first card that had the word exile printed since the card Exile.
Since the
which
card
I think was in like the dark. And it is the most recent card before they changed removing from the game.
Yeah, it really was like the last one. Yeah.
So certainly was itself a path to exile, in addition to being a insanely ubiquitous card in every format that it could possibly be played.
Yeah, it's just it's crazy. It's one of those like, Swords to Plowshares was one thing, but I never thought they'd ever come close. Then they have. Yeah. Ruben, what's number 6?
My number 6 is a card that I thought for certain was going to be higher on someone else's list. I cannot believe it's the highest on my list. In fact, I almost didn't put it on my list because I was like, oh, they'll have it at 1 or 2 or 3. And I was shocked that I am going to get to talk about Miss Erin Campbell, Golgari Grave Troll, as my number.
Ooh.
I was shocked.
Wow.
How am I the one that
wow.
at number 6?
Because to me, it's natural and normal. That's why.
But it changed Magic forever.
You wouldn't have that deck if it wasn't for that card.
That's right. Golgari Grave Troll is 4 colorless and a green. It's a creature type troll skeleton. It's a 0/0. That doesn't matter. Golgari Grave Troll enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter for each creature card in your graveyard. Very rarely matters. Pay a colorless and remove a +1/+1 counter from Golgari Grave Troll. Regenerate Golgari Grave Troll. Did you remember that Golgari Grave Troll could regenerate?
I sure did.
Dredge 6
Woo!
is the headliner here. And it doesn't even have reminder text on the original printing of the card, which I find quite adorable. Any of the printings, actually, because there's so much text, it doesn't matter.
Only the Magic Online theme deck version.
Wow.
That has all the tiny words on it.
And the tiny words are, if you would draw a card, you may instead put the top 6 cards of your library into your graveyard. If you do, then you return the Grave Troll to your hand. Otherwise, you draw a card. It's a replacement effect. It gets all wonky. This is a huge piece of the Dredge strategy, which is one of the most important pieces of the modern era in terms of overall strategies across all formats from Vintage on through Standard. It is widely believed to be a design mistake.
It is. Don't worry. It's bad.
The entire strategy revolves around putting your library into your graveyard and casting abilities for free from your graveyard. Things like Bridge from Below and Narcomoeba and Cabal Therapy and Dread Return and effects like that. There is an entire strategy in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage built around milling yourself. And in Modern, you use such hits as Shriekhorn to be able to do so. It is a totally unique ability and is definitely responsible for huge changes of the modern era.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very alien play style. You know, I think a lot of why people and it's a very alien play style, and it has such a polarizing effect on people. You know, people don't like to practice against it. They don't like to pack cards for it. They don't like to acknowledge that it exists. There is this weird fear around the deck that I've never seen with any other archetype. Like, people are fine losing to Affinity, they're fine losing to Storm, but they are not losing to Dredge. And I've never, and it's fascinating. Like, I could honestly write an entire article about just the fear that the mechanic expires. And it's been a very interesting ride as I've played the deck for so many years. Just to see people's reactions to it and the way that people deal with it and the way that it makes people feel. I've just never seen anything like it. And like I said, it means a lot to me. I just wasn't sure that, you know, I didn't think of it as being like game, you know, changing, but thank you. You're definitely right.
Yeah. I believe maybe it was regionals. It might've been like a states or something back then, but back during Ravnica Standard, I was playing the Glittering Wish control thing and somebody against me was playing Dredge. This was like old school Dredge, obviously. And I was just like, what are you doing? And they're just like, I'm just, and I'm like, okay, whatever, Loxodon Hierarch. And then all of a sudden the Golgari Grave Troll comes out and is just gigantic. And that was a thing back then, and proceeded to beat me to death with all of his terrible creatures that they played for free.
Sometimes you just get there with a big Grave Troll. You know, there's been a lot of talk about what exactly is the best reanimation target for a Dread Return. Sometimes it's just a 16/16 Grave Troll. It's fine. Like,
I one time got killed by a Stalking Vengeance with a bunch of Bridge from Below triggers.
Wow.
Standard. That was in Standard, by the way.
Yeah, man.
yes.
I had a Teferi's Moat in play and was like, haha, your zombies can't get me. And he was like, haha, Stalking Vengeance, get you. You know, Blazing Archon over the years. Even then you have the combo kills with things like Flamekin Zealot.
Did you know that Sharoom saw play in some early Dredge lists?
No.
There was an article on Star City Games. Mark Hornung had done the history of Dredge going back to like a long time ago. And oh yeah, Sharoom was a piece of early Dredge. And I was like, I had no idea.
Wow.
Well, if I'm going to have Storm on the list, you got to have Dredge on the list as well.
It's very true.
Aaron, what's number 6?
Well, speaking of dead things and speaking of graveyards, tutors, going back to as far back as Magic, you know, we had Demonic Tutor, which was infamous for its imagery. You know, this was around the time where there was this sort of religious fervor. And here you had this game with like pentagons and pentagrams and demons and horns and unholy strength. You know, you had cards like that freaked parents out. And I'll never forget the episode of Unsolved Mysteries where they didn't actually name Magic the Gathering, but they implied about a mystical illegal card game that led to a murder. And like, there was a time where people thought that Magic was like a cult and it was wild. But I digress, you know, so we had Demonic Tutor, which allowed you to search for anything that you wanted in the game. And then we had Vampiric Tutor, which allowed you to do something similar. But these were tutors that allowed you to search for anything you wanted and then put them into your hand. This card broke all of the rules in that it let you take anything from your library and put it in your graveyard. Why would you want to do that? I'll tell you why. My number 6 is Entomb. So Entomb was from Odyssey. It's an instant 1 black. Search your library for a card and put that card in your graveyard. Shuffle your library. Instant speed. If you're playing anything with a reanimation strategy, you know, normally you have to discard things like, you know, you have your Faithless Lootings where it's like, is it already in my hand? Can I get it? Well, all right, I guess I'm just pitching these 2 random cards. But to get exactly what you need at instant speed, I mean, my God, you look at Legacy nowadays, and the ideal draw for Reanimator is Swamp, Dark Ritual, Entomb, Animate Dead. I mean, this card changed the games in terms of what tutors can do. You know, we always thought of tutors as you would want this card in your hand. No one would have ever dreamed to go fetching for something and put it in your graveyard, but this card was the one that did it. And we've never been given anything. I think we got like Shallow Grave.
Sure.
Is that what it was?
Shallow Grave was
Buried
way
Alive.
earlier.
Buried Alive, I think it was.
Buried Alive was
Buried
around.
Alive. But
Yeah.
just this, we just don't get very often, and maybe won't again. But this to me was a huge moment in terms of redefining what tutors could do.
Yeah.
This was the idea that, like, ultimately back then, how to put this? This is one of those cards that as Magic gets older and we just keep making new cards and do things, it just keeps getting more and more busted. And
Like
you're
an $18 card still, and it's been reprinted. Yeah.
the sweet new artwork from Seb McKinnon from the most from the
I have to play that.
very nice from Ultimate Masters, which is great. But yeah, that card has always just been absolutely fantastic. And it's always gotten better. That's the best part about it. It just gets better.
Yeah.
All right. So for my number 5, this is where we're starting to get into not necessarily categories, but we're getting into categories. Because this card, while it was definitely, you know, important in terms of when it was printed and why it was printed and what it did, it basically started an entire trend of ways to make creatures happen. And this is Old Man Magic. All right. So I was there at the Visions pre-release. Okay. And Visions in particular was the set of all the sets that you could say they started enter the battlefield abilities. And there was no creature that blew people's minds more at the time than Necrotol. Necrotol is 2 black, 2 generic mana for a 2/1 first strike. When it enters the battlefield, you destroy target non-artifact, non-black creature, and that creature can't be regenerated. So it would terror something when it enters the battlefield. So basically you paid 2 mana for the 2/1, you paid 2 mana for the terror. Ta-da! You got a super sweet creature, but now it's a creature, so everything you can do with the creature, you can bounce it, you can flicker it, you can whatever, and you can get that effect over and over and over again. And these days, it's almost unheard of that most creatures don't have something like that when they enter the battlefield to do X or whatever. But back then, that was new and novel and freaky, and no one had ever seen anything like it. And it was great. And all the creatures from that moment forward were different because Necrotol was the first one to be there to change the game.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, as creatures have gotten better, I mean, you look at cards like, you know, Golgari recently in Standard. You know, Golgari was a thing, and the way that people were choosing to fight it was with Tocatli Honor Guard, because it just so happened that a lot of what Black Green was doing involved ETB triggers with the Chupacabra, the Jade Light Ranger, and so it's sometimes the metagame aligns in such a way where effects like Torpor Orb, Hushwing Griff, you know, are good and foils to popular strategies. And it's just amazing to think about that. And, you know, obviously ETB lends itself to being broken with blink effects, or you have recursion effects like Rally the Ancestors. You know, not only are you bringing these things back from the battlefield, but surprise, when they enter, they do things. And so the way that they can be manipulated, how powerful they are by themselves, it really is a big deal.
Yeah, it's terrific. Ruben, what's your number 5?
My number 5 is the second and final hire that is on someone else's list.
Aaron, what's your number 5?
It's no secret that I love broken strategies. Like, I play Magic to feel something, and I feel the most. I feel the best when I am doing things that the good Lord never intended most Magic players to do. And no card embodies this like my number 5. And I've certainly played cards that have been banned and even restricted before, and it feels amazing. I play Storm, I play Dredge, and then I've seen cards, get banned after the fact, like Dig Through Time, Treasure Cruise. But I think it says something about a card, and I think it changes the way when we look at bannings, when you find out about a card that was banned before it even really came out, quite honestly, where, the fact that people had gone to work on this card when it was previewed and Wizards immediately realizing what they had done, there just hasn't been anything really like this. Number 5 is Memory Jar. So Memory Jar is from Urza's Legacy. It's 5 colorless. It's an artifact. You can tap it, sacrifice Memory Jar. Each player sets aside their hand face down and draws 7 cards. You with me? At end of turn, each player discards their hand and returns to their hand each card they set aside this way. And so the story goes that Urza's Legacy was the set behind this card. This also enabled what they called Combo Winter, I believe. And so we were coming off of Urza's Saga, which had a lot of powerful cards. The DCI was already kind of suspicious of more combo cards. Players began leaving the game, according to Randy Buehler, because they were tired of these broken combo decks. Memory Jar was supposed to herald in new combo decks. And just days after Urza's Legacy became tournament legal, sure enough, there was a fast combo deck built around this card. Randy Buehler and I believe somebody else were responsible for that deck, which led to them getting hired. They got hired by Wizards as a way to prevent future combos like this from not being created anymore, that these guys had such an eye for that sort of thing. And days after this card became legal, the DCI banned it outside of the usual schedule. The first emergency banning in the history of the game. I mean, what card can say that nowadays? A card that was just like, nope.
that they will argue wasn't an emergency banning, but was
won't
rather
even say it.
It was retroactive addition.
Yeah, I mean, this to me is worthy of being a game-changing card. Memory Jar. I mean, you just say the card and people just sort of groan of like.
Yeah, based on at least the story as I found it here. First of all, it's a combo deck that wins with Megrim. That's whenever an opponent discards a card, it deals 2 damage to that player. So that's how you're going to kill them. But ultimately, it was the midseason banning after Randy Buehler and Eric Lauer. Eric Lauer is still working today as part of R&D. Finished 3rd and 4th in Grand Prix Vienna in 1999. And they basically just got it built up a ton of mana and went stupid crazy, and just got super banned,
then got jobs.
Yeah.
They knew how to break it. I mean,
that's one way to get noticed for sure.
And it's weird because I think if you look back, and particularly sort of the Randy Buehler era of R&D and how he was in charge of R&D, and Magic itself was so much spell-based. This was the Fact or Fiction era. This was the Gifts Ungiven era. This was the Sensei's Divining Top era.
Good years.
It was, and for the Spikes of the world, it was amazing. And then later, as the positions changed, and he was ousted from the company, and there was Gleemax and a whole bunch of other stuff. But ultimately, whoever was in charge at that point started to go, wait a minute, let's have some creatures be the best thing, and not these ridiculous, crazy spells or these really skill-intensive spells that Spikes love, but bad players are bad, so they hate them because they can't play them very well. And it's just interesting to see kind of how that all was shaped. And part of why it was shaped was because Randy did so well with this deck and got hired and got put in that position.
Yeah, there are some really interesting parts of Memory Jar's history that I wanted to touch on real quick. Randy was well known for traveling to European Grand Prix. It was sort of the joke at the time that Randy made more top 8s of European Grand Prix than every other American attended combined. And he and Eric were playtest partners. Eric was not really a grinder, but after a couple of playtest games with the deck, Eric realized he was just leaving money on the table, and so bought a last-minute ticket to Vienna to play the deck.
Man, you ever played a deck and you liked it so much you're going overseas?
Right, exactly. There's no card that has a legacy quite like Jar in terms of the emergency removal of it from the game. For how little time Broken Jar was on the scene, it has a window of being relevant for less than a season, but it is still talked about in these hushed tones to this day.
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at even the decks that Randy prefers now, if you watch him on the Vintage Super League, he loves Storm, he loves Outcome. You don't see Randy really playing workshops very much. You don't really see him, playing creature decks too much. He'll play a Mentor, maybe a Tinker Blightsteel, but I think it says something about the era that he came from and that he helped create in the decks that he still likes to play today.
All right, let's move on here to number 4. I don't have one. It is my final hire, but again, it's a good one. So, Ruben, what's your number 4?
Speaking of shops, my number 4 is Arcbound Ravager.
Nice.
Just cutting right to it.
Bam.
I don't want to talk about shops in this context. Aaron, perhaps you can give us some more vintage context with Arcbound Ravager, but there is no card that has done so much for so little of a cost in so many different formats, but primarily while in block and in standard as Arcbound Ravager. It's one of the most efficient creatures that's ever been printed. It requires a specific strategy and synergy to be able to function, but once you have that synergy, it's just an engine that is insurmountable. You can turn irrelevant resources into damage, sacrificing off used artifacts that, things like Springleaf Drum that no longer are relevant during a game state. You can move damage from one source onto another. Very important with Ornithopter, for example, being an unblockable kind of creature, or Signal Pest, particularly as you can do it mid-combat, attack with your 0-power creature underneath an ensnaring bridge, and then put all those +1/+1 counters on it for final damage. It can sacrifice for free. If Sam Black has taught us anything, it's that if a card says sacrifice a creature, and has no effect, we're still playing it. And of course, it has its own out. It has its own escape valve in its own dying trigger. To be able to transfer stuff to another creature via modular. Arcbound Ravager is just one of, if not the most efficient single linchpins in the affinity and shops and mud archetypes.
I mean, this card is the reason why Hardened Scales is a thing. If you would look at Hardened Scales on its own, you wouldn't think that's a $4 enchantment, but here we are. Hardened Scales is so good that it has supplanted regular affinity as we know it in Modern as being the strategy for Ravagers and for artifacts, because if you double it, that effect gets out of hand. The card just wins games out of nowhere. I remember the first time I ever faced a Ravager, I was playing Modern Living End, and I remember I had faced Affinity, I had cascaded, I was feeling so good about myself. My opponent goes, in response, whoop, whoop, whoop. Okay, you can have your Living End. And I was like, what, no. And then they'd bring everything back. And I was like, no. And then when I started playing in older formats and I started playing in Vintage, bridge and below. So they'll just be like, I'll just sacrifice my steel. No. And you realize all of the things that this card enables. Hangerback Walker, normally it's a bit of a problem trying to figure out a way to get rid of your Hangerback. Somebody has to kill it or you have to block with it. Oh no, you can just break it. And then if you're playing Hardened Scales, so you sack your Walker to the Ravager, Hardened Scales, you get a whole bunch of Thopters, you feed those to the Ravager, Hardened Scales. It just enables so many things. It turns cards that are normally really innocuous into lethal pieces just out of nowhere. It changes the combat math in an absurd way. I'm never happy to see this card, and it just swings the game the minute it hits the board.
So there I was, 2004. 2004. All right, 2004, and walking into my friendly local game store, I had rediscovered Magic the Gathering. I was very excited about it. It was Friday night, which of course meant and I had built my white weenie deck, and I was very proud of it. And I had, of course, Ruins of Annalines, one of my favorite creatures of all time. There was the 2-mana, 2/2 flyer from Mirrodin or whatever. I can't remember the name of it. Amongst others, in my arrests and stuff. And then round 1, it was Vault of Whispers, Disciple of the Vault. Yeah. And I was like, what? What does that do? Pick up, read, put down. Okay. Turn to Arcbound Ravager, and then I think I died. If not the next turn on turn 3, maybe I lasted to turn 4.
Sure.
Maybe. And that process repeated itself 4 times for the 4 rounds of F&M.
Right.
And I was like, wow, that card is stupid. And when you look into the history of Arcbound Ravager, and note this was my number 8, so it was on the list, just wasn't as high. Because when I was thinking back, and I was like, wow, Skull Clamp or Ravager? I'm like,
right.
Skull Clamp was a thing. But Ravager changed Magic and continues to change Magic. Skullclamp was dumb and stupid and had a moment, whatever. Ravager just keeps going. And when you read about how they were like previewing the set of Darksteel or whatever, and in Wizards offices, they're like, man, I'm going to try that Arcbound Ravager card in Affinity. And like, no one had done that in R&D. Oh my God. It busted everything. This card is amazing. It slices, it dices, it brings you, it's just the fairy godmother. For a while, we just called it the fairy godmother because you would draw it and be like, oh, I won the game. There it went. You did everything you could. You had all your shatters and shatterstorms, but it don't matter because Ravager don't care. Card's bananas.
Didn't they? I could have sworn Samstad went on the record as saying it was supposed to be 3, and it was another one of those they just made 2 for some reason. It was like, why?
Last minute change, quote unquote, is like there was an era where last minute changes were just like destroying Magic constantly. Every time something would break, they're like, well, you know, at the last point with Jit, Skullclamp, Ravager, whatever. It's like, okay, guys, thank you very much.
Yep.
The only last minute change I ever heard that was somewhat decent was they made Jace's ultimate from -9 to -12.
There we go.
That was a good change. Thanks.
Right.
Aaron, what's your number 4?
So my number 4, again, is a category of cards, but we'll probably start off with the most popular one. This was a keyword action that was introduced in Innistrad, and was something we had never seen before. You know, normally Magic cards, what you see is what you get. You know, if you're looking at an artifact, it's probably going to stay an artifact. You know, maybe it'll turn into a creature, but it'll still be an artifact. Your lands are lands, your creatures are creatures. This changed the way that we played the game. And this had effects on the tournament scene in terms of how we, you know, when you watch coverage and someone's doing a draft, it changed the way that we did that. It changed the way that we played the game. It required you to have sort of placeholders or proxies because of the kind of cards that you had. And some of the most powerful cards that we've seen in this current era have had this sort of ability. And we've seen everything be affected by this, which is great. My number 4 is Delver of Secrets, or just transform cards in general. #Transform Mafia. So transforms, so we'll start off with Delver. So Delver is 1 blue. It's a creature type human wizard. It's a 1/1. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can look at the top card of your library. You may reveal that card. If an instant or sorcery is revealed this way, you transform Delver of Secrets. It becomes an insectile aberration, which is a creature type human insect, a 3/2 creature with flying. So you're getting one thing, and if you meet the circumstances, you can have another thing. You had cards like Huntmaster of the Fells that you could almost trigger. You could almost control it if you wanted to. You could choose not to play a spell. You could choose to play 2 spells. We've seen lands be transformed. We've seen artifacts be transformed. Artifacts in the lands, enchantments into lands. Search for Azcanta is an iconic piece of blue, you know, for blue spells. You know, you look at Elbrus, the Binding Blade, which gets you a big old flying 13/13 Withengar Unbound. And so you look at the ways that they've been able to play with transform and just the impact that it's had on the game, and the fact that you really can put it in so many different sets. It really is a great action and a great change for the game, and I hope to God that we continue to see more of it.
This was my number 9.
Yeah, creatures into planeswalkers, baby Jace.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the double face cards in general, this was the classic Rosewater story. You know, he's got this crazy idea, you guys, and it's never going to work. And everyone's like, Rosewater, you're so crazy. That's never going to work ever. He's like, and then I just put it on a card and I threw it in the playtest room and people said, it was pretty good. And we were like, oh my God, woo! And then and so they did it, and then they did it for Dark Ascension, and they didn't do it for Avacyn Restored, and Avacyn restored it. And we were like, wow, remember it was really fun? We had double face cards, really cool. Huntmaster of the Fells, certainly important, I recall, for that Pro Tour. Remember the Pro Tour where everyone was like, wait a minute, this card is bananas, and this Channel Fireball they all played 4 of, you know, because it was insane.
Yeah, transform obviously now has a From the Vault transform involved with it. This was a decision that was supposed to kill Magic. Another on that list of 20 or 25 things that were going to kill Magic were transform cards. Being able to print twice the Magic the Gathering in half the space, you know, putting and really being a flavor win of we were going to this place where things changed, particularly the werewolves showing their human into their werewolf forms with physically turning the card over was a huge win.
That said, let's move on here to number 3. So there I was, 2005. Now, back in the day, back in the actual day before the Facebook and the Twitters and the Instagrams, we went to web pages, actual factual web pages to
GeoCities.
to get information. When's the last time you went to dailymtg.com?
I was there just the other day.
Yeah, we were talking about this. I don't go there very often, but I think
go at least
Aaron is last bastion.
Look, back in the day, like, you went there every single day. You checked out the Arcana. You read all the articles. It was super cool.
I liked solving there was like, here's a card on Monday and here's a card on Tuesday. And then you had to figure out how the 5 cards were related by the end of the week.
Yeah, they would do all sorts of cool, like, creative stuff like that. Yeah, which was fantastic. And one day, I believe it was like I want to say it was either in August or something like that, where they usually did like a card of the day and they would write a little blurb about it or whatever. But that day they didn't have any blurbs. They just showed you one card, and that card was Temple Garden. And Temple Garden and the Shocklands changed Magic. Ridiculously is the best way to put it. It's the first actual dual land since the dual lands. It was what made Ravnica such a fire starter of reinvigorating the Magic player base as to oh my god, this is exciting. This is my guild. This is where my guild lives. We got that watermark in there, which is great, which is fantastic. Like, everything about these lands were nothing but exciting, and you can get them with fetch lands and all this other stuff. Like, that was just amazing. And ever since, first of all, it never fails to crack me up that they said, hey, we named them nice and generic so we could reprint them wherever we wanted to, also known as only in Ravnica.
Right. They never put them anywhere else.
And it's also no secret. I don't know if it's necessarily, tied together, but people say that standard is at its best when there's a Ravnica set around or a Ravnica block. And so I think the fact that when these lands are in a format in standard, that usually means that you can play whatever you want. And to be fair, people aren't playing madness, they're not playing nonsense strategies, but when you're not bound by color fixing, when you can play a 2 or 3 color deck pretty seamlessly, that is a very enjoyable standard. And I don't think it's a coincidence that standard is as great as it is now, and as great as it was last time. My fondest memory was Return to Ravnica standard. And so, you think of it and it just kind of goes hand in hand with a good set.
I mean, the standard's pretty dope.
I do love that current standard has most of the monocolor decks have a playable, are playable. Most of the 2-color decks are playable, and most of the 3-color decks are playable. So you have this huge swath of varied mana bases and strategies and different types, from your green black Sultai mid-range kind of strategies to 3-color control kind of strategies. You don't have to play any Shocklands at all if you want to play mono red, mono white, mono blue, any of that kind of stuff. Then there's a Gates deck that's also 4 colors. It doesn't even use any of these. And I definitely agree that formats that have the Shocklands have been the most fun and healthiest of the formats that I've played in my time in Magic the Gathering, which is most of my life.
They also have the biggest shoes to fill. Anytime a new sort of land comes out, you have the temples, and people are like, it's not Shocklands, or you have the cycling lands. Those aren't Shocklands. And so very, very big shoes to fill. My favorite thing about the Shocklands is the tell. So like, if you see somebody fetch and take it and pass, it's like, what are you doing? Or the opposite. You see someone fetch and you're like, oh no. And then they're like, tapped. And you're like, so I love the little signals that you can read into, or if you see a burn player who's like, or a Death Shadow player who's like, that shock too, and they're like, doesn't care at all. It's like, ooh.
Or it's a feature and they want to get down.
Right. And
I do like playing like, Watery Grave untapped as my 4th land, go down to 16, pass. And they're like,
Well, it's amazing that the cards are so important and so impactful that there are decks and strategies that literally exist because people are so greedy with the fetch or the Shocklands. It's like, okay, shock yourself all you want. I'll play an island and say go.
Yeah, I mean, it's the reason why burn is, so good in Modern, is because people are often hurting themselves, or you look at you look at cards like Blood Moon, or you look at Path to Exile. Everyone's running these ridiculously crazy mana bases. When you Path to Exile and everyone's running these Shocklands or these duels, you can't go ahead and get that with that. You have to get a basic. And so if you're able to turn the mana off, I mean, it's free wins.
All right. Ruben, what's number 3?
My number 3, you know, I've been talking a lot about individual cards that have enabled wider synergies, sometimes emblematic cards that represent a group. But I haven't talked so much about individual cards in individual types, because I think that this card gives the rest of the cards that are in its category a bad rap, and the cards that are in its category should be getting a bad rap. But Mental Misstep is so much worse than any of the other Phyrexian mana cards that it deserves its own spot on the Pantheon.
Oof.
It is egregious. Mental Misstep is a blue mana Phyrexian style, which means that it can either be paid with a blue mana or 2 life. It's an instant that says counter target spell with converted mana cost 1. In August of 2011, it was banned with the comment, Mental Misstep is banned. Force of Will has long been thought of as a card that helps keep combination decks in check in Legacy and Vintage. However, it doesn't directly help decks that aren't playing blue. One idea that was floated was creating a similar card that could be played in non-blue decks. They just admitted it outright. They wanted you to play this in Goblins or whatever.
And they did.
When Phyrexian Mana was designed, it was an opportunity to create such a card. R&D wanted a card that could help fight combination decks and could also fight blue decks by countering cards such as Brainstorm. Clearly, a card like this has a lot of risk. Boy, howdy does it. But there is also the potential for helping the format a lot. The risk is mitigated because if it turns out poorly, the DCI can ban the card. Unfortunately, it turned out poorly. Looking at high-level tournaments, instead of results having blue and non-blue decks playing Mental Misstep, there are more blue decks than ever. The DCI is banning Mental Misstep with the hopes of restoring the much more diverse metagame that existed prior to the printing.
God, that stupid card.
Yeah, and that was a weird time.
It was
when I was just a wee standard player, you know, I remember looking at this card and just not getting it. I was like, what costs 1? Like, what do I care about? Like, this card's stupid. And then as I started to play older formats, it was like Ancient Stirrings, Faithless Looting, you know, Therapy. You're just Cage. You're just like, and then you realize, especially in older formats, that some of the best cards cost less than 3. And the number of things that this hits, like Ponders, Brainstorms, I mean, Bolts, like, I mean, you can get Soul Rings with this. It's just like, and until I started packing them myself, it just feels amazing.
Man, what this did to Legacy was just disgusting. Like,
getting misstep battles where it's like, here's two.
Oh yeah, there's my lackey. Well, I'll misstep it. I'll misstep your misstep. Well, I'll misstep your blah blah blah. I'll force the will. That's a freaking game now. It was completely insane.
Where I think that there was at least one tournament where there was 30 mental missteps in the top 8.
It's definitely the reason why I think so. I've been very lucky to be able to do 3 seasons of the VSL. And, you know, when you're doing the VSL, you do want to try to bring something spicy to the table. And I cannot tell you how many brews or how many decks I have tried that are simply not viable because Mental Misstep is a card. Enchantress. Yeah. I found a really sweet Enchantress list. When all your wild growths are getting misstepped and then snapped missteps, it feels terrible. Like
right. That's the other thing is think about this card with Snapcaster. Oh. Mental Misstep was banned in Legacy and banned before Modern was defined. Mm-hmm. Snapcaster didn't even exist yet.
Yeah, I try not to get too heavy-handed when it comes to Vintage and bans, and I admit that I don't know enough about the format to really make those calls, but, you know, I can't deny, you know, as somebody who has had to try new things, just how many strategies really do get kept out of the format because of Mental Misstep.
Card's stupid.
It is.
Phyrexian Mana is broken.
But when you get a cage with it, it feels amazing.
The card is dumb. There's nothing remotely fair about it. It makes no sense in terms of what's a color pie. I don't know. Let's just pay 2 life and do whatever we want, because who cares? Aaron, what's your number 3?
My number 3 is a card that redefined the way that we think of ourselves and how we play the game. Recently, there has been a lot of talk about this card type and people who are honestly quite tired of it. They feel like the experiment has kind of run its course. they feel like there's nowhere else you can really take it, and that it might be time to kind of move on. And when War of the Spark was announced, when we knew what we were getting into with this set, people were a little excited, but for all the wrong reasons. They were like, maybe this set will be the turning point. And I don't know whether or not it will be, but I do think a lot of the criticism is fair, and so I'm excited to see what's going to happen next. My number 3 is Jace the Mind Sculptor, but just more specifically Planeswalkers.
Yeah.
So when we first started playing Magic, you were the Planeswalker. You know, I remember playing that crusty old computer game for the first time. I remember reading the big thick rule book that came in the 4th edition thing, and they really hammered that point home that you were dueling other Planeswalkers. You were the Planeswalker. And then right around Lorwyn, they introduced Planeswalker card types, and it became less about you being the Planeswalker and there being actual Planeswalkers that you could sort of embody. And they worked really hard to sort of create this Avengers-style roster of like, are you a Garruk? Are you a Jace? Are you a Chandra? And like, you found somebody that you could relate to. But through the years, you know, some have argued that the experiment has gone a little bit awry. You have Planeswalkers like Teferi and the latest Chandra that feel just sort of jammed into their strategies, where people are going, there's no real skill here, there's no real deck building challenge. You know, the Planeswalkers sort of come and go. We have some Planeswalkers that are here for a minute and then you never hear from again. They really need to trim the roster a little bit. Finkel, I believe, has been quite critical of Planeswalkers actually, and it's just like, I'm out, like I'm exhausted, like I can't do this anymore. And so when we found out that we were going to be going to this plane that had a war, people were kind of excited, where they were like, maybe it'll trim the roster a little bit, or maybe the design space will be improved a little bit. And so, you know, Planeswalkers have come a really, really long way, but you can't deny the impact that they've had on the game.
I mean, well, this was my number 4. I specifically named Garruk Wildspeaker because that was the best of the original 5.
The original Lorwyn 5, yeah.
Right. And it was great when I got to talk to R&D at PT Hollywood, and they're like, yeah, Garruk Wildspeaker was the best one because green at the time was kind of crapped on.
Yeah. Yep.
And green needed something to be awesome. And yes, Tarmogoyf existed, but you needed something else. And the Garruk Wildspeaker was certainly something else. Planeswalkers in and of themselves, this was... And again, this is, as they have told me, that where they brought in a marketing agency and they said, okay, who's your Mickey Mouse? And we're like, what? And they're like, no, I mean, they're like, well, we've got these characters that we kind of hang out with for a while, and then we move on to other places. And they're like, no, you need to find a Mickey Mouse here. And even when they were first introduced, they didn't do anything on Lorwyn. Lorwyn had its whole like story that just kind of happened, and they were just hanging out in the set because they were supposed to be in Future Sight and they didn't make it. But by the time Shard showed up, that was when a Johnny was there and a Johnny Vengeance. That was when Elspeth was there to save the plane. And then we kind of started this whole bit. And there's conflux with Bolus and stuff. And so like that stuff really started rolling right around then. And now you do have a very storyline driven game. And I mean, I can't look at the evidence and say that like Magic is better off without them, because when they showed up, you know, correlation is not causation, but man, Magic really exploded after Planeswalkers showed up.
Absolutely.
Especially when you were able to see yourself in different characters. You know, you look at the Kayas, you look at the Ashioks, you look at the way that they've been able to, you know, grow and portray the community, you know, in every form. You know, I think for a while there, the archetypes were pretty narrow, where it was like, you know, are you the angry buff dude? Are you the fiery lady? Are you the introverted whatever? And people were like, I'm none of those. And so now the roster has expanded where you can be a Tameo, you know, you can be an introverted girl who loves to read, or you can be, you know, a sultry necromancer like Liliana, or you can be, you know, there really is something for everybody nowadays, and I think that's great. And you know, I think that they've made some good strides in terms of Planeswalkers. I've said before, I think the recent crop are quite good, specifically the latest Vraska and the latest Liliana and even the latest Kaya. You know, Planeswalkers that at first glance you think these are garbage, but when the right deck finds them, they're incredible. And so if they were to keep making Planeswalkers along that line, I would be a really big fan. But you know, especially looking at the new Teferi out now, it's just like,
Kaya Orzhov Usurper is one of the great, like, all-time turnaround. This card is trash. I can't believe how bad this Planeswalker is. No one's ever going to run this card, to like being a format all-star all over the Mythic Invitational. Broke a bunch of decks in half. The key to beating mono blue if you're playing the Esper control deck. Like, all these things come together, and I can only imagine the raw satisfaction that R&D gets when they know how good Kaya is in terms of, like, you know, the context, and everyone else is just like, the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. You know, it's like, okay, dude.
So I like the planeswalkers that are not just sort of brute force, you know, because you're playing these colors that you must play it. So I'd like to see them continue that way. But I really think, you know, War of the Spark's going to be a turning point, and I'm anxious to see what happens next.
I really like the two choices that you specifically chose for the planeswalkers as well. I think that Garruk, being the best of the originals, to this day probably still the best planeswalker in Commander, for my money. It's because planeswalkers are kind of garbage in Commander. There aren't many I really want to play. Garruk, I think, is great in Commander. It gives you additional mana. It gives you it gives you blockers and attackers, and threatens an ultimate very quickly. Jace the Mind Sculptor, of course, being Mickey Mouse, being the card, being better than all, being the thing that you think of when you think of a powerful Magic person in the game of Magic.
To the point where Wizards was like, could you please stop talking about Jace the Mind Sculptor? Putting his face on everything. We're like, okay, fine. It's fine. It's whatever. All right, let's move on to number 2. Ruben, what's your number 2?
My number 2 is, you know, there aren't a ton of cards out there that you can say that a single card impacts every single format in which it's legal. It defines multiple decks in multiple formats. Lots of decks splash for this card specifically and solely for its inclusion. It is a card that every time it's been reprinted, it has been the headlining card of its reprintedness. And it is a card that when we say, well, it's not that good, all it does is it attacks and blocks. But it redefined what it means to just be that workhorse that doesn't do anything when it comes into play, doesn't draw any cards, doesn't gain you any life, doesn't do anything when it leaves. It just attacks and blocks. But there is only one Tarmogoyf. Tarmogoyf is a colorless and a green Lurgoyf. It is a star and a 1+ star for its power and toughness. And its power is equal to the number of card types among cards in all graveyards, and its toughness is equal to that number +1. There are just decks all over the place to this day. Still, you're playing Jund, you're playing Death Shadow. You still have Tarmogoyf as part of the main purpose of playing the deck, the main impetus. You know, Canadian Threshold, now called Rug Delver. Tarmogoyf is basically the only green card. Maybe you play Nimble Mongoose. Back in the day, you would play things like Werebear. But this is really the reason for it. Next Level Blue in Old Extended was the poster child for this, where you had 4 Tarmogoyfs in your deck, and the rest of the deck was blue and artifacts. That was the only thing that you had in the deck. It was so ubiquitous for a long time that it was a cornerstone of every non-vintage format that existed. And it hit upward. I think it almost hit $200 a piece at one point. Nowadays, it's a much more reasonable, svelte 50 or whatever.
Is it down to 50 now? Because it was hovering around 100 for a long time.
It was more than 100 for a long time, and then it kind of went down,
especially after the reprints.
Yeah, so they've kind of reprinted it. I would argue enough at this point to like we're going to need kind of a resurgence of Tarmogoyf in Modern. I think to really see that price bump again.
Fatal Push was really the nail in that coffin. Like
Fatal Push hurt it a lot.
Yeah,
sure. But as that gets played less, maybe it will be, probably not. Yeah. But if it gets played less, this will show up.
Yeah, so Tarmogoyf was my number 8. I mean, and inspired its own mechanic. You know, you look at Delirium, you know, in Standard, a whole mechanic based around keeping track of your creature types. If I understand the lore of this card correctly, it was not well received when it first came out. Like people were like,
no one knew what's
terrible. This is hard. And then like once you realize that like you don't even need to try that.
Exactly. That was the big thing.
Yeah, just by doing what you're doing, that's the sign of a powerful card, is when you don't have to try to make it work. You're just kind of doing what you do. You know, the way that it changes the rules in terms of, you know, how many times have you seen the rules question of the bolt in response, where you're blocking, you bolt something, oh, your Tarmogoyf has just grown a little bit bigger. Having to play that juggling game with Scavenging Ooze of like, well, I really need to eat things, but I really need that whatever. You know, running the odd planeswalker in your deck, Baleful Strix being an artifact and a creature, tribal I believe being a creature type as well, that plays into that. And so in the Jund decks, in the Bug decks, and Legacy, Vintage, apparently this card is great against workshops. Who knew? But when Survival of the Fittest was a thing, I know the survival decks were trying to figure out how to improve their shops matchup, and they were like, let's run Tarmogoyfs.
Wow.
Like,
That's hilarious.
to try to give you some historical perspective here, no, Tarmogoyf was unlike any other Magic card that existed before it. Like, no one knew what to do with this card. First of all, they thought it was bad, and then everybody who bought them all at $3 just, you know, they have the best story of all time. Oh yeah, but literally every week it was like, it's up to $10, it's up to $15, it's up to $20, it's up to $25, and it just wouldn't stop. And we were like, oh my god, we're gonna get a $100 card in standard that had never existed, like not even close. There wasn't the mythic rarity, it was just rare. It was just in Future Sight as a rare like any other, but it just kept getting more expensive, and it got all the way up there, and people just lost their minds over this stuff. And even today, the original, the cheapest you can find for a lightly, let's go for near mint. Our near mint Future Sight Tarmogoyf is still $700.
Wow,
that's an incredible amount of money. So this card again was just amazing. When I went to my first ever pro tour in Valencia, one of the questions I asked all the pros I met was, is Tarmogoyf too good? Is Tarmogoyf like bannable or whatever? I can't remember exactly how I phrased it, but you know, but then you have Zach Hill in there going like, it just attacks and blocks, you know, and other people going like, I think it's okay, but it's not that great, you know. But it's like, Tarmogoyf has just ran formats from the moment it saw print. It was amazing. All right, and that was your number 8. That was my number 7. So it bounced around the list a bit.
We're all feeding the Tarmogoyf. It's fine.
That's right.
Everything feeds the Tarmogoyf. That's the joke. All right. So for my number 2, this was a card that impacted me a lot. Certainly when I first got into the game, I didn't really understand it. This was a card that predated the Urza's Saga crazy garbage. God knows what they were thinking or smoking back then. But it also just really showed me that card evaluation is just a skill. It's a skill that you have to develop and understand. And you can't always just take people's blind read on whatever a card might be. You can't say that Inquest said this was the worst card and then go, well, it's the worst card and never look at it again and don't even worry about it. Because they said Necropotence was the worst card in Ice Age, and that card is busted with like
I got chills when you said it.
Like 3 Bs busted. That card is insane. Like not even close. It was so insane. Like it was just, another one was like classic, like Evan just will not play the best deck. That's just what I do. I just could not play the Necro deck. I was just playing everything to stop this stupid enchantment. And all I ever did was lose to turn 1 Dark Ritual Necropotence. I did that for months and months, and it was the Necro Winter. This was the first card that really just broke what you would describe as standard, just like in half. This was the best deck. It was not close. This is what you played. This is how you played it. Otherwise, you're an idiot. Like, and Necropotence just, it just changed everything from before in sense. And it was like, okay, this is what happens when you print broken card engines, even though they kept doing it. Yeah. This is what happens when you
bargain. Yeah. So this is a card that, you know, sweet little standard playing Aaron. First off, I used to call it Necropotence. I was that girl. And I just didn't get it. Like, I remember just looking at it and be like, why would you want to do this? Like, why would you want to hurt yourself? And then like, you have to discard things like, ew. And then like, as I started playing older formats, it started to really dawn on me. And then once I played Vintage where it was legal and I started to actually play with it, I was like, you just feel that feeling. Like when you have it in your hand and you're doing the thing and you're like, should I draw one more? Should I draw one more? Like, it just feels amazing. Like there's just cards that make you feel something. And this is a card that you, when you have a Necropotence out, you feel like that cackling super villain of like, I don't know when to stop. And like having to play that game of like, you know, even now I'm still not very good at like exactly how many cards do I want to draw, where people are like, you can like draw 8, it's fine. And I was like, like it just goes against everything you're taught, and it just feels amazing, and you can't believe that you're playing it.
It was bananas. And it's hard for me to describe the world of like janky garbage that everyone was playing, and then this thing. It's like everyone's out there racing in their Pintos, and then like the NASCAR car shows up and you're like, what? And like, wow, and just destroys everything. It was ridiculous.
You ever played Necro in Commander? Boy, let me tell you. Yeah,
Is it legal in Commander?
Yeah, it's legal in Commander.
Legal in Commander.
Yeah, boy.
I
Yeah, let me
haven't-
tell you something about Necromune Commander when you have 40 life to start with.
Woo!
And I thought Sylvan Library was too much in Commander.
Oh heavens. Yeah, if you wanna have some fun, go get
Is
yourself
bargain legal?
I
don't
believe
know
so.
Okay, because
But yeah, go have yourself a Karlov of the Ghost Council and have yourself a good time with Necropotence. I love Necropotence so much. It's won multiple Pro Tours. It's gotten second at multiple Pro Tours. It is a card that has definitely changed Magic forever. This was my number 5.
Nice.
I think that there is no question that this deserves to be in the top 10.
Yeah, this card was just absolutely bananas. It's crazy. Aaron, what was your number 2?
So my number 2 changed the way that control decks are played. If you are playing any sort of blue deck and you are not playing this card, you are doing it wrong. It is, card advantage. It is a win condition. It allows you to play spells that were never meant to be played more than once without jumping through significant hoops. When you play Vintage and you play an Ancestral Recall or you play a Time Lock, that alone is awe-inspiring when you're like, holy crap, that is a Time Lock that is restricted in the format. You got a Past in Flames, you got a Yogg-Will. Yogg-Will's restricted, so you got to really find that one-of card to get you that. Oh, no, it's fine. I'll just run 4 of these, and I'll be able to play it again. My number 2 is Snapcaster Mage. So Snapcaster Mage is from Innistrad. It's 1 in a blue. It's a creature-type human wizard with flash. A 2/1. When Snapcaster Mage enters the battlefield, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. Getting to play an Ancestral Recall twice, getting to flash back a Paradoxical Outcome, flashing back a Time Lock. These are cards that were never necessarily meant to be played more than once in a row. Counter spells, Mana Leak, Remand, Snap Bolt, that's a win con. Bolt, Snap, Bolt, that's a thing. Bolt, Lightning Helix, the ability for a control deck to pivot into a burn deck is terrifying. Like, blue decks have not been the same since this card came out. And, it was also one of the last invitational cards, Tiago Chan. You look at the art on that, they don't really do this anymore. If you win a certain tournament, your art ain't getting on a card. It's just not happening anymore. And this card is another one that's been reprinted over and over again. Still $75 if you can get it for $60. If it's like played, but still, this is another card that has maintained its value. It will always be good. Sometimes it's just an Ambush Viper, but you can't deny that it changed the way that blue gets played.
It was this card. I mean, I was there in Philadelphia when they unveiled this card. This was shown at the Pro Tour. This is when Modern first became a format. And later, as I understand it, later had a last minute change to give it flash. It originally did not have flash, as I understand it, as the story was told, like it needed it. So suddenly, not only would it have been amazing without flash, now it just gets completely absurd because of counter spells and bolts and stuff. And Snapcaster is just, it's a heck of a match.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. All right. Let's move here to number 1. And I share my number 1. Yep, with Aaron. That's fun. So we'll do ours last. Ruben, what's your number 1?
I'm also missing my number 10, so I believe that we'll overlap there. My number 1 is a card that has kept every format in which it's legal sane. It's kept every format in which it's possible to be played. First of all, one of the most played cards in that format, but it makes sure that Magic is playable. Even when you have your foot on the gas and can't take your foot off, you want to be able to have a brake pedal. And one of the cards that's a brake pedal is Wasteland. And one of the cards that tried to be a brake pedal was Mental Misstep. But there is no card that is able to temper a format to be able to make sure that anyone can play the varied different things than Force of Will.
Wow.
Force of Will is 5 mana, but we're never casting it for that unless we get mana flooded. It is an instant, originally from Alliances, and you can pay a life and exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay the spell's mana cost, counter target spell. This card is the reason why we have more pitch cards in the future, things like Unmask and Bounty of the Hunt was part of the original cycle, but Unmask, as Aaron loves, and other things like Foil. Force of
Spinning
Will.
Darkness.
Spinning Darkness, there you go. Force of Will is a huge part of the legacy and vintage metagames to this day, one of the most important parts of those decks to this day. It has been a promo card a number of times, a Judge gift card in 2014, as well as an Amonkhet Invocation. Its art has changed over the years, but its effect remains the same, and it is still beloved by all.
I mean, say what you will about the card, it is a safety valve. You know, when you look at decks like Belcher, if you look at the Storm decks, you know, that want to crack the LED and go for the Infernal Tutor, you know, there are so many decks out there that simply just ask, do you have it? And if you don't have it, I'm coming for you. One of the big complaints about Modern is that people feel like they don't have an answer like Force of Will, or they don't have like something like Wasteland, you know, just to be able to deal with a lot of the fast, powerful shenanigans that Modern is capable of. You know, you look at Modern nowadays, or even Vintage nowadays, and Dredge has started running Force of Will because we needed a way to compete with Paradoxical Outcome, you know, having that critical mass of blue spells. And so, you know, it does keep many strategies in check. I think it's relatively fair in that it is disadvantaged. You know, you do have to juggle having that blue spell in your hand. Sometimes you can hard cast it. If you're hard casting it, you probably already won the game, but you know, it does put you down a card. You know, I know it's very interesting seeing the control mirrors. I've heard that they board out the forces in those cases. And so, you know, I think it does serve a very important place in Magic's history. And specifically when it comes to those older formats, I think the world would be a very, very different place if we did not have Force of Will, and not for the better.
Back in the day, when the rocks were soft and alliances had just came out, and I can still buy booster boxes for $50 if I want them. And Force of Will came out with Contagion, which, by the way, was far more exciting than Force of Will. Contagion was much more played. Contagion was far more exciting.
Contagion won the Pro Tour.
Yeah, and so like ultimately,
well, Necro won the Pro Tour, but Contagion was in the deck.
Yes, Contagion was in the Necro deck. But ultimately, what I'm trying to explain is like we weren't like freaked out by this spell. Like as a Magic community that I was in at the time, it was like, it's fine. But there was this entire idea of card disadvantage. This was the theory at the time of you never want to be in card disadvantage. So things like Force of Will, things like, what's the other counter spell? Arcane Denial, that gave them 2 cards. Still gave you a card, but it gave them 2 cards. And that's super bad, even though you countered a spell with only 1 blue mana in part of that cost. But you gave them cards, and that's bad. So there was a whole thinking of this is poop for a very long time, and only later, as formats like Extended and later as formats like Legacy really came into shape, where you see, oh, wait a minute, Force of Will is this card that went from like 50 to 60 to 70 to 80, all the way up to $100, and has more or less stayed there. And it even started getting crazier until they finally reprinted it in Eternal Masters, which is nice. Now, this is being filmed before we have any idea what is in Modern Horizons, at least the first one. So I'm guessing that they're going to give us something like Days in Modern. I 100% believe Counterspell is in that set. But I think they're going to give you something like... So? Yes, absolutely. I would put money on Counterspell being in that set. If you want a lunch, I'll do lunch. I love lunch bets.
You're already eating pie in 2 weeks, so why not add a lunch pie?
You could pie bet Counterspell.
Yeah, you want to pie bet Counterspell, Aaron?
I don't feel that confident.
Wow. Okay, there you go. Well, what I'm saying is,
I feel that confident.
Really? Seriously? Okay.
No, to bet against you?
To bet against me. Okay. Well, either way, the point is that a free counterspell, a free disruptible thing, I think they want to have in Modern, but I think they're going to inch themselves towards it and not just throw Force of Will in at the very get-go.
Sure.
But they'll give you something like Days, I think. But Force of Will, again, before and after, absolutely fantastic choice. But that brings us to Aaron and I's choice, which I'm not sure if we picked the same one, but we picked the same type.
Yeah.
Which is more or less what we were talking about.
And it's also my number 10.
Nice. Well, there you go. Because I chose, personally, Polluted Delta. Because I felt like that was one of the first cards of the fetch lands.
I went even older. I chose Rocky Tar Pit because what a lot of people don't know is that fetch lands weren't always the way that we know them now. The original batch, there were 5. They came out in Mirage. The originals entered the battlefield tapped. So you couldn't just crack it right away. It was that, and then you could next turn, and that's fine. But
and to complete the cycle, I picked Scalding Tarn.
Okay, and so they started off as being allied color pairs, and then came Onslaught, which is where they were untapped as opposed to the first batch. And so this really changed the game. You know, when you look at cards like Brainstorm, you look at the Miracles mechanic, you look at, you know, the cards like Wild Nicottle, the ability to fetch for exactly what you need, the ability to play whatever colors that you want. You know, you look at formats like Legacy and Modern, and the way that color to a certain extent doesn't matter. The way that this card changed cards like Deathrite Shaman that maybe wouldn't be as powerful if we didn't have fetch lands. You know, you look at the way that they pair with the OG dual lands. I mean, you look at the way they pair with Death Shadow. There's even been talk of fetch lands just needing to go. Like anytime there's a ban list conversation, whether it be in Modern or Legacy, you hear a lot of like the usual suspects. Like people will name cards, but every once in a while you get people who go really deep down the rabbit hole and they're like, what if we just ban fetch lands? And it's like, and they have these really deep conspiracy theories about how everything that's ultimately wrong with these formats boils down to fetch lands. And I don't necessarily ascribe to it, but it is fascinating when you just think about how deeply entrenched these cards are and try to imagine Magic without fetch lands. I just can't.
The number one issue with fetch lands is they introduce loading screens. I'm going to do this. You're going to wait until I get done finding and shuffling and presenting and cutting until we can finally move on and continue to play Magic. That was the number one reason why they didn't want to print them. That was the reason why they said they were hesitant to print the ones in Zendikar when they did the enemy color pairs. And ultimately, it is the fetch lands themselves, I think, that drive most of Legacy play. Legacy would not be Legacy without fetch lands. Without the fetch lands, you don't have Brainstorm interaction. Without the Brainstorm interaction, you have a completely different format, which doesn't look anywhere close to what we have now. So that very important sort of aspect of life before fetch lands, life after fetch lands, it's very much like Planeswalkers in that it's a different game.
It was even a financial barrier for a while. You know, when I first started playing Modern, one of the reasons why I started playing Living End was because it was a budget option. I couldn't afford fetch lands. Like fetch lands at the time were $60 a piece, and I think I needed 4 Verdants for Living End. And I remember having to splurge and being like, okay, I'm going to save up my Puka points. I'm going to save up my store credit. And I remember so many people saying that they weren't able to get into Modern because of the price of fetches. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it was only after, you know, they were reprinted in Battle for Zendikar that more people started getting into Modern. I feel like they really opened the floodgates in terms of people being able to finally afford Modern. And it made a huge difference because that was the card that you would always look at of, oh man, I can't play. I can't afford those cards.
And even today, Scalding Tarn, as of this recording, is well over $100. And
what, still?
Oh yeah, it went back up. And because once Ultimate Masters came out and like the impact set in of like, wait a minute, they're not really making Modern Masters anything anymore. So when are they going to reprint the fetch lands?
Oh my God, even the Modern Masters.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
How? Oh my God.
Because they're not making them anymore for a while and you just always need them. And that's literally why it's at number 1 on our list. Wow. So that said, ladies and gentlemen, that was our top 10 cards that changed.
Catacombs are 80.
That was our top 10 cards that changed MTG forever. You'll see them on screen right now for your review. Take a look at my list, Aaron's list, Ruben's top 10, and we want to hear from you about what card we did not talk about, and we'll select our favorite to win a $50 gift certificate to CoolStuffInc.com. But before we go, I want to thank my co-host. Thank you, Aaron.
I'm stunned. Like they were affordable. I'm not.
The sticker shock.
Now I look like a jerk.
Yeah, the sticker shock is there.
It's real. Thank you, Ruben.
Thank you.
We're gonna move here to our final slide. Good gosh. All right. I want to thank our sponsor, CoolStuffInc.com, our co-sponsors, CardHoarder.com and Cardamajigs.com, presenting Cubamajigs. My co-hosts, Aaron Campbell and Ruben Bressler, you guys for watching or listening, and hope you support us at patreon.com/magicmics. Please follow, like, tweet, favorite, share, subscribe to everything social that tells people we exist. Catch us online at twitch.tv at MagicMics, on Twitter at MagicMicsCast, our Magic Mics subreddit, and like the Magic Mics page on Facebook. Talk to us privately at magicmicspodcast@gmail.com. Follow the audio-only podcast at magicmicspodcast.libsyn.com, or find us on iTunes, or join us here next week. Same time, same place for another episode of Magic Mics. Good night, everybody.